Welcome to Life in the Valley podcast, and I'm here today, Matt Olson, Jason Soderstrom, I'm Paul Ice, and we are in our series on the pursuit of happiness. Today we're in Matthew 5:7. Happy are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy, or blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. So we're going to get into the topic today. Happy are the merciful.
I love this sermon series. Thanks for preparing it for us, Matt. It's been unbelievable. Actually, one of my favorite messages was Matthew 5:7, where you talked about mercy, and you asked a question. You go, can you show someone too much mercy? And everyone was sitting there just going, can you not?
Right. I didn't want to say out loud, but I was thinking, yeah, probably. No, that's not the spiritual answer.
Yeah. And then you go, yes, you can show too much mercy. And I'm like, okay, good. Yeah. I feel that all the time.
That's what I was going to say.
Yes, and then you go, that's exactly what Jesus did for you. And it like stabbed me in the heart. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's what he did. Yeah. So I just wanted you to unpack that a little bit more of that idea of just what does mercy really look like?
Yeah, and I think when you say too much, God is really never too much or too little. But it's too much in our opinion. Mm-hmm. In other words, that's a bit extreme. Yeah. But that's exactly what he did for us.
And, before we even get into that is a little bit why Jesus was viewed as a little bit radical during his time, is they thought he was doing a little too much of everything, like
a little radical, a lot radical.
A lot radical, right? And so when he makes a statement like this, and you make a statement like that, can you show too much mercy? That's what Jesus did. It does. I think our viewpoint is it looks a little radical.
Well, that's what the Apostle Peter, one of his disciples, asked him one time. He said, how many times should I forgive someone? 7 times? I mean, right. You think that's really out there to forgive someone or to show mercy 7 times. And Jesus came back with 7 times 70, which is really infinite. It's so far beyond what we think we could do, what's possible. So I think maybe to qualify what is mercy, what comes to your mind when you guys think of someone who's merciful or mercy?
Right. I mean, so I have 3 kids, so mercy always, to my mind, jumps up when I don't give my kid what he deserved. And I think, wow, I'm doing what Jesus said. Like, I'm being so merciful. That's usually the first illustrations that,
I prefer not to give the mercy. I prefer to receive the mercy. Like when I get pulled over for speeding and the cop goes, you're speeding, I caught you doing it, but you owe nothing. I'm like, that's mercy. It's not getting what you do deserve.
Right.
And the difference between that and grace, because grace is a word we use a lot, giving someone grace. Mm-hmm. So how would you distinguish grace and mercy?
Yeah, I mean, for me, grace, giving something to someone that they don't deserve. So versus mercy, the withholding of something that you do deserve, and grace, obviously, being a blessing or something good is the way I think.
I've always just heard unmerited favor is the idea of grace, and so grace. I would exactly.
Yeah, it's like the police officer, like, oh, and by the way, I have 2 tickets to the Broncos.
Here, take those too.
And you're like, wait, that's not mercy, because they stink. You have something good to give me?
Grace would be him giving me something.
We said it's not going to be about the Broncos, but every week we'll probably have some gig on the Broncos.
And that's giving grace is what God has done for us and giving us so much. But mercy is withholding what we deserve. It seems a lot harder for us to do that for other people. We want it for ourselves, but it is hard for us to do it for other people. So what are some of the ways you show mercy specifically? I mean, we talked about forgiveness. I think that's huge, being willing to forgive someone. And
I think one of the things that keeps sticking with me from that, what you talked about, was it's just having a positive outlook on people, that people are going to doing the best they can. They're not out to get you. I think in our society, we always just think, maybe it's not everybody. I think a lot of times the worst of people, not the best of people.
Yeah. Right. Thinking the best, hoping the best.
Yes. Assuming the best.
Assuming the best. Not trying to discern their motives, but just extending that I'm a merciful person.
So what's the risk? I mean, I think that we're afraid of something. When we say you can be too merciful, you can be too merciful.
Right.
So what are we afraid of?
Yeah, we're afraid that they're not going to get justice.
Okay.
Right? That there is an element of justice that needs to happen for this world to function.
Right.
Right? So if Jason gets pulled over for speeding and, the example was he showed mercy, is Jason just going to go out and do it again?
And he needs to learn his lesson.
And he needs to learn his lesson. And what happens if Jason keeps getting shown mercy and keeps shown mercy? The next thing is like everyone's going to be speeding, and this world's going to be chaos.
So we're afraid justice will not be served.
Right.
Yes.
Justice won't be served, and what will it look like if justice isn't being served?
Chaos. Be chaos.
Yeah.
People will get away with things.
Yes. And when people know that they can get away with things, what does that look like?
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's, I think Jesus will kind of, through all of his teaching, show how that's an unfounded fear. I think, one, because he is a sovereign God and he doesn't let anything slide. He is just. So you think someone's going to get away with something. No one gets away with anything with God. No one does.
Right.
And so he will make everything right. Either he's going to bring it to justice, or the justice will be resolved in what Jesus has done for us. And I think that's important to remember. So I think that being able to trust God with a lot of things, that he is sovereign, he's all powerful, and he's holy and just, he'll not let anything slide, and he's got this, allows me to be merciful. But there's some times where you get into like family, because you were talking about that earlier. You have a role and responsibility to bring justice. So I think it's not outside of my world that I have to leave with God. He has given me a role as a parent to be just.
I mean, it almost makes me feel like it's all impossible, because I felt the same thing. My kids would love me just to not give them what they deserve all the time, but that's the role God's put into me, and I keep going back to the Sermon on the Mount. This is an impossible life to lead without a supernatural power,
Right.
It's impossible.
Right. And I think to distinguish, you guys are both parents, you got kids at home. Ours are gone, so a little different being a grandparent, but
yeah, you don't have to do any justice as a grandparent.
No,
you give them candy. My kids come over here and he just gives them candy all the time.
It's all mercy and grace. But it wasn't that way. You got kids running around, and so but that's in the realm of my responsibility. I think a lot of times when I start taking responsibility for things that are not my responsibility.
Oh, that's good. That's really good.
Outside of that are really God's or someone else's. That's not my role.
Right.
Then I get into trouble, and I think we do that so quickly and so easily.
I caught myself doing this the other day. I honked the horn because someone didn't go right away on the green light, and Molly looked at me and like, why do you care? And I go, someone's got to teach them a lesson. It's like my responsibility to patrol and bring justice to the world is somewhat in my sin nature, and it causes me to lean into that. And so I feel that's so good.
It's a self-righteousness.
Yes.
It's a Phariseeism. One of the groups watching were the Pharisees, and they're known as being hypocrites.
That's why they're ticked off when he's talking about this.
It's exposing that.
And it's why you take the Bible as a whole, right? And meshes together. That God gives you roles that sometimes that you have to, execute justice in your life. And our usually is, one, we don't have a heart of love is usually problem. Number one, we don't have a heart of mercy. Or three, we're stepping outside the bounds of what God has called us to. And self-righteousness is probably one of the greatest ones. Right. God's like, I've got that. That's not your role. And so maybe on that, you said earlier that, when God shows us mercy, justice will always be served. And one of the ways was Jesus on the cross. Can you just touch real quick how that resolves mercy? So, and justice and mercy were resolved on the cross.
Yeah, I think that all sin has consequence and deserves penalty. We know that. But when Jesus died on the cross, he took on himself our sin and paid the penalty to God for that. So, to me, it is the most extreme example of mercy and forgiveness. And anything he asks me to do is so far less than that. And so that's why it's such hypocrisy for me not to be merciful or to be kind or to be gracious or to be patient with someone, to be merciful in my spirit when he's been so merciful to me. But that's exactly when we give someone no slack, no benefit of the doubt, no mercy, then it shows we just didn't get it. We just didn't get it. That's kind of the parable that he tells later in Matthew 18. This shows that you don't understand what you've received if you can't be merciful.
And I think that I love what you're saying there, and I would love to even, as we close later on, hear more how to practically have that. There's something interesting in this passage. It's kind of like a lot of people can read it like, if I show mercy, I'll receive mercy, because it's blessed are those, what is it, that are
merciful, for they will be shown mercy.
So is that the way I get mercy? Is it a transactional thing between me and God?
Right, and that's probably the way the Pharisees have been functioning. If I do this, God will do this for me. Mm-hmm. Well, that is so contrary to all of the biblical teaching, and so it's actually to be understood this way: that blessed or happy, joyful, fulfilled, content are the merciful. It says, for they shall receive mercy. It's really because. It is because they have received mercy, they are merciful. This is the effect. If I really get it, if I really understand what he has done for me, what flows out of my life is being merciful. And I think that it shows up in every way of forgiving people who don't deserve to be forgiven. I think with your kids, sometimes you have to discipline them or punish them, but you're kind and you're patient and your demeanor, your spirit is one of great mercy. So even in the realm of my limited role and responsibility, there is still a thankfulness for the forgiveness that God has shown to me.
It's really good.
Yeah. Well, even with that, it brings up the question, what do you deserve?
Right.
So with God, when he says showing you mercy, I think it does have an understanding, what do I deserve? Yeah. And, the whole scripture is pretty self-explanatory. The penalty for this is death. Yeah. The penalty for this is separation for God. Yeah. And I think in our own life too, when we enjoy mercy, it probably is because we appreciate actually what we do deserve. Mm-hmm. And when we give mercy, there's probably appreciation. So I think isn't there also a part of this that even when you do give out discipline or correction that the Bible teaches there's probably always an aspect of mercy in it, that you don't give the person completely what they're due and deserve anyways. I mean, I think with your children, you can hand out correction, right? And in a merciful way, because like you said, you're kind and you're loving, and what do they actually deserve, and correction in a way that's beneficial.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and this is how we grow in understanding. I think we get back to the overriding theme of authentic Christianity, authenticity, and when a person is not merciful, in other words, they're judgmental and critical and negative and mean and unkind and just want justice served against everybody else but themselves. I think it tells me either way they really don't know Jesus as their Savior. It's not personal. They've got a form of religion that is more like the culture of that day and the culture of our day. Or they are a Christian, but they just don't understand the mercy that's been shown to them. They just didn't get it.
And I think it goes back to what we were just talking about. It's the transactional view of God.
Yes.
Like, even though that's you can read all of this, and if you read it as a transaction, if I'll be given mercy if I've shown mercy, and it's this transactional relationship. That theology or that doctrine, if you take that and you apply that to every part of your life, that I'm a blessing. If God blesses me, I'll bless others. That transactional.
That is a profound point that you just made there. I mean because if you live that way, it all becomes performance, and there is no joy, there is no happiness, there is no peace. But when the transaction is done.
The debt's been paid.
The debt is paid. There's nothing that I can do to put myself in a better standing before God. It's all been done. I mean, that just relieves you a lot of the anxiety that people experience.
I just felt happiness thinking of that.
So that's this way.
Yeah.
On this way, we think of it too that way, where blessed are the merciful, for they'll show mercy. And like even we were talking about with standing with God and transactional, but even with our spouses, our coworkers, and our friends, we live this way sometimes too, right? Where I'm going to show mercy because the expectation is that I will be shown mercy back. Yeah. And that's a miserable way to live too, right?
Yeah. You're just counting everyone's debts and, I'll give you mercy if you do this for me. It's a miserable life. I've even seen that. I think when I was newly married, you can kind of get in that. And one advice I heard from somebody, I forgot who it was, they're like, how far do you come and how far does your spouse come? Most people say I come 50%, they come 50%. That's we both come 100%. And it changes a relationship when we're merciful because of what God did for me. That's even the just amazing thing of being married to a follower of Christ, that we're both going towards that.
So you can live transactional in your life too, and it is not the happy and blessed life. And I think you pointed it out, about that, the way you come. So is it possible then, Matt, to be merciful, but it doesn't qualify as God's mercy? So I did what the passage said.
Well, the troubling thought is that Jesus looks at your motive.
Right? So
this is what he gets to, and it's very uncomfortable, because why you do what you do is just as important to him as what you do.
Yeah.
And so if I'm being merciful because I feel good about this, or I feel like God's going to reward me, or he's going to bless me if I do that, that's wrong. The only really pure motive is out of gratitude to God for the mercy he's shown to you. Just flows out of your life. But that's exactly right.
And the only way to have that, I would say, is later in the Sermon on the Mount, he says it's of a pure heart. That in Ezekiel, it says he gives us a new heart.
Right.
And so there's a new heart that's within us that can actually, from the Spirit, be merciful.
Right.
But being kind and patient and forgiving, the hardest place to do that is at home.
Yeah.
But it also means when someone cuts you off on the road, when someone's slowing down the line, you're waiting at the grocery store. I mean, this should be what is characteristic of our lives in its entirety, is we're merciful. And those kind of people are different. They're happy. They're happy.
And they're different, and I think the world desires them.
Yes.
One of the hardships, I think, why people don't see Christianity as authentic is because we're just like everyone else. So when you show mercy to the person at work that does not deserve mercy, you're different.
Yeah.
And they're going to see that. And that, I believe, is how the gospel spreads through all the world, is through it just outplaying in our own lives. It's the overflow, as you were saying.
So we hit on a couple topics today. Happy are the merciful. We just looked a little bit what mercy looks like. Looks like we cannot separate each one of these, mercy being one of them, apart from authenticity and apart from relationship with God, because the relationship draws us to each one of these. And I'm looking forward to more of these. So today's merciful, and that's just one verse in this whole package of kingdom living and following Jesus, as you pointed out at the beginning of this.
It's amazing how Jesus can use one verse. And we could talk about it for hours, right?
So the greatest message, and you could probably preach it in less time than any of our messages, or less than this podcast. So, so we'll work on that too. Well, thanks for joining us. This is Life in the Valley podcast, and looking at Matthew chapter 5, Pursuit of Happiness, and we're grateful you could join us today.